today's webinar. So this is supporting staff returning to work after lockdown. There's still quite a few people joining us, so I'll just give them a few minutes to join. So before we get started, I do just want to go over a few things just so everyone knows how to participate in today's event. So I've taken a screenshot just of an example of the attendee interface. So you should see something that looks a bit like this in your own computer desktop in the right hand corner. So it's just letting you know that you're listening in with your computer speaker system by default and that you'll be muted for the duration of the webinar. But you can still submit any questions by typing those into the questions pane on the control panel that I've highlighted there. And you can do that at any time during the webinar, and I'll maybe pause at certain points and try and answer some of those questions for you, or make sure I'm just answering them throughout the webinar. So there are also some handouts available that you should be able to access through this control panel, and these are just offering you some additional information about some of the things that we're going to be talking about. And included in those is a toolkit that we've written to kind of go alongside this webinar on supporting staff returning to work, that does go into a bit more detail about some of the things we'll be mentioning today. So I would definitely encourage you to take a look at that at some point. So you can download these handouts during the webinar, but we'll also make them available after the webinar on the First Psychology Assistance website under the News and Events tab, where all the information, all the resources and a recording of today's webinar will all be available there, and I'll send you a link to that in the follow-up email. So don't worry if there's anything that you want to get hold of after the webinar, or if you just want to refresh your memory about something that we've talked about, all of that will be available to you as well. So I think we're mostly all here, so I'll just get started. So hopefully you can all hear me, no problems there. So I'll just introduce myself. So I'm Dr. Heather Meikle. So I'm a counselling psychologist, and I also work as clinical projects officer at First Psychology Scotland. So I've worked at First Psychology for about 2 years now. I started off as a student and then as a practitioner developing delivering one-to-one therapy, and now I do both therapy and developing resources for clients and businesses like this webinar. So I'd be really keen to get any feedback about what you've enjoyed or what we could improve about this at the end. So in today's webinar, we are going to look at the psychological impact that returning to work after lockdown might have on our staff wellbeing. So it has become quite apparent throughout the lockdown that there are quite significant risks to our physical and our psychological health as a result of the pandemic, and it's likely that these will impact on people's confidence and ability to return to work. So some of the negative consequences might be anxiety just about the ongoing health crisis, maybe fear of infection, some social isolation. There might be domestic challenges at home or bereavements as a result of losing a close relative or a friend because of the virus. So the aim of this webinar is just to increase your awareness of some of the mental health issues that staff might be facing on returning to work and how you can best support them through this transition. So we're going to spend the first kind of half of the webinar talking about these different psychological impacts, how it might be different from the mental health awareness that you maybe have had prior to the coronavirus. And then we're going to look at some scenario-based stuff so we can have a bit more of a discussion, because I think just listening to me for an excuse me, for an hour will be quite boring. So hopefully you can input lots of your ideas, lots of questions that you've got, and we can have a bit more of a discussion of how we can support staff for the second half. So before we get into all that, I just want to ask a quick question just to see where everyone's sort of starting off from. So how confident do you feel right now about being able to support your staff returning to work after lockdown? So if you want to go ahead and click the response that best fits for you and press submit, I'll get a bit of an idea of how you're all doing. So you might be quite confident in supporting staff's mental health, and you might find that a little bit more overwhelming or intimidating, or you might be somewhere in the middle. So just, if you've not responded, go ahead and do that now, and I'll close the poll in a few moments. Okay, so I'm just going to close the poll now, and we can see how everyone's doing. So it looks like the majority of you are feeling quite confident about supporting staff. So you're maybe just looking for some fine tuning or a little bit extra knowledge about what might be going on for people just now. So that's great. If you're not feeling very confident and there's anything that you think we could cover that would really increase your confidence, do let me know and I can make sure we try and talk about that later on. So we'll just get back to the webinar and we'll see if we can't get more of you to feel more confident. So one of the first things that I do want to talk to you about, I think we'll be seeing a lot of with staff returning to work, is anxiety related to the coronavirus. So generally we would take for granted that we can go out into the world and nothing bad is going to happen to us, whereas the lockdown has really encouraged people to rush into their homes, not interact with anyone outside of their house because there's a threat that they could potentially catch something life-threatening. So with this advice, there's a massive amount of security and safety lost, which will probably increase a lot of people's trepidation, a lot of people's anxiety about returning to work, especially as the lockdown restrictions start to lift. So some of the first staff to return to work especially might feel like guinea pigs. They might struggle to trust the safety of returning, and some people, while they'll be desperate to return to work, others might experience more lasting fear of infection because there's still a lot we don't know about the virus. So how do we recognise if a staff member is anxious? So some general symptoms of anxiety, we can kind of split those up into some physical symptoms, so trouble sleeping, maybe over under eating, difficulty concentrating or remembering things, or some psychological symptoms, so maybe worrying a lot, avoiding family and friends, feeling very irritable or feeling really down, maybe losing interest in the things that would normally bring us joy. But I think these symptoms are quite common, especially for general forms of anxiety, and they will likely be very similar to what staff will be experiencing. But anxiety related to health and illness can also include some behaviours that are more common to like health anxiety, so compulsions to clean surfaces, as well as hands or body, hyper awareness of any changes in our body and fear of infection, and this might be common with people. It seems to have cut off some of it, I think, in my presentation. Hopefully you can see all that. So you might notice some changes in staff behaviour that are maybe a bit unhealthy when it comes to things like cleaning. So they might be unable to engage in their work because they're maybe spending too long looking for chances of infection or cleaning their hands or their workspace, for example. So you might be faced with staff who are quite fearful to return to work because of the health risk that this poses to them and those closest to them. Particularly if they are caring for an elderly or a vulnerable relative, that fear might be a little bit more enhanced. And so you might be faced with staff who feel a bit afraid or unable to return to work. And that might also come into play, if a lot of your colleagues rely on public transport to commute, because the use of this is still, I think, being quite discouraged because of high risks of infection. So there might be a lot of fear around the safety of returning to work because of travel or because of looking after vulnerable relatives. So a lot of fear might be coming up for staff returning to work. So another way that the lockdown might impact your staff is a lot more people might be struggling with lower mood or depression. So many of us rely on routine, regular social contact and support as a way of maintaining our positive mental health. And a lot of staff might have found this has been completely taken away from them because of the lockdown restrictions requiring us to social distance, to self-isolate, maybe we're remote working. And people who have been self-isolating for longer, maybe because they themselves or they have a relative in a vulnerable group, or people that are living alone, or those with a history of depression will probably be the most at risk. So you might recognise depression in staff, a lot of it very similar, especially the physical symptoms, anxiety, maybe difficulty concentrating, trouble sleeping, changes in appetite, things like that. And some similar psychological symptoms, feeling sad, maybe feeling angry, losing interest. So you might see some similarities between some of those, but on the more serious end of the scale, you might have staff feeling very hopeless, feeling very worthless, or thinking about harming themselves or taking their own life. And in that case, that would of course need to be escalated up to a professional. So managers might be faced with staff who are very unmotivated to return to work or struggle to engage with their work or their colleagues. when we are feeling depressed, we are feeling very hopeless, there really is a massive lack of motivation just to get out of bed a lot of the time. So staff might struggle to readjust to stricter schedules again, setting alarms, getting dressed for work and travelling in. Or they might just have become accustomed to working from home with more autonomy and less formality. So it's likely that a lot of people are going to need a bit of a period of readjustment for that. And as well, staff mood and functioning, it might be really impacted by stress during lockdown. So that could be coming from work, whether they're furloughed or working from home, just because circumstances are changing, things are very uncertain. But they could also be experiencing further stress just depending on their domestic situation. So staff might have some additional responsibilities to care for vulnerable relatives, like I mentioned, or children on top of their work commitments, and they might experience extra stress as a result of, say, financial uncertainty, especially if their partner's lost their job or significant income, or they might even experience additional strain on their relationship. I think social isolation and lockdown is probably causing a lot of tensions between couples or families that are having to spend a lot of time together if they're maybe not used to that. As well, some employees might feel a reduction in stress when they're working from home or they're on furlough because they've maybe got fewer demands on their time and they're more able to spend quality time with their family. So they might feel actually more stress and guilt about returning to work and leaving this behind. So a few different situations that people could be in. So really all depend on their domestic situation. So you might be able to recognise stress in staff. Again, a lot of these can be quite similar, especially physical symptoms, maybe changes in appetite, changes in sleep, feeling very tired, maybe difficulty concentrating. Some other ones that often come up in stress can be like increased use of substances to kind of cope with things, whether that's coffee, cigarettes, or alcohol, or other substances, drugs, alcohol. I think I covered all of those. So that's something that obviously is good to watch out for, as they can become significantly more serious and more dangerous for the individual. But again, some of the psychological impact can be quite similar. Just be losing interest, maybe being excessively emotional. Some things, especially with stress in work, might be not feeling like you're able to cope, jumping from task to task, avoiding family and friends, and things like that. So this is all included in the toolkit that is in the handout. So don't worry about copying any of this down. It's all there for you. So managers, yeah, they might be faced with staff who are maybe overwhelmed with the current changes to their ways of working, and they might be struggling to adapt or return to work, especially if they're experiencing the increased demands of looking after vulnerable relatives or children that still require support, or partners that are maybe still out of work and they still have a lot of financial pressures. So that might, kind of increased pressures might result in employees not wanting to come back to work, or feeling really overwhelmed by a change in workload, and maybe struggling to engage or concentrate on work tasks, and maybe also struggling to look after themselves, especially. So on top of that anxiety, stress, low mood that I think probably a lot of us will be experiencing, there's a couple of things that might be a little bit more unusual, a little bit more rare, that we're maybe not as used to seeing. So staff members may also be grieving, and this process might be a lot more complicated than we're used to. So obviously, sadly in the UK, tens of thousands of people have died as a result of the coronavirus so far. And the ongoing impact of the pandemic means that staff might have lost family members, partners or friends, and you yourselves might have experienced the loss of co-workers as well. And a lot of this loss will be very unexpected, it'll be very shocking. It might have a significant impact on staff's mental health. So, for example, because of the infectious nature of the virus, it's likely that a lot of people wouldn't have been able to say goodbye to their loved ones, whether in hospital or at funerals, just because attendance has been so severely restricted. And so they might struggle to process their grief. And similarly, because of the social isolation, social distancing, staff members might find themselves physically alone when they're grieving, and that can really increase feelings of grief and loneliness. On the other hand, people might find that their response to bereavement's been delayed just because they're currently been so distracted by worries for their own health, for other people's health during the pandemic, and so their grief might hit them much later than expected. And it's also useful to be aware that some things about our grieving process might be a wee bit different because of the coronavirus. So, excuse me, it's useful to be aware that employees might have considerable anger about their bereavement. So they might feel like someone is to blame for the death of their loved one. It could be that they blame themselves, maybe for infecting the person. They might blame other people, maybe who aren't socially distancing or adhering to the rules properly, or with governments, maybe for their response to the pandemic. They might also feel a lot of guilt, maybe for being alive when the loved one has died, or for not being able to visit them, or maybe, for not being able to meet their last wishes. This will be especially true if loved ones maybe had to go into intensive care despite having indicated that they wanted to die at home, or maybe they weren't able to return home after recovering from the virus because of other health concerns. So all of this is likely to have a long-lasting impact on employees when they return, especially when they return to work, just because they might still be struggling to come to terms with what they've experienced. And that goes along with a lot of the other symptoms of bereavement. Tripping over my tongue there. So similarly, we've got the anger, we've got the guilt, we've got the sadness, maybe feeling hopeless, not feeling motivated, losing interest, difficulty concentrating, not taking care of ourselves. So managers might be faced with staff who are too emotionally overwhelmed to return to work, and they might struggle to engage or concentrate with their role and their colleagues. And this might be compounded if there's a lot of reminders of deaths that are resulting from the virus, especially because this is being discussed quite often socially or in the media. So that can make it quite difficult to resume kind of normal activities. And something else that we might not frequently come across is medical treatment trauma. So often if someone's been hospitalised for a serious illness, once they've physically recovered, we often consider the recovery to be over. But if a staff member has experienced the virus themselves and requires hospitalisation, they might experience some symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, known as PTSD, or post-intensive care syndrome, known as PICS. So while someone might have recovered physically, severe illness or near-death experiences can have quite a long-lasting psychological impact, and these symptoms can also be experienced by close family members who've witnessed the hospitalisation or severe illness of somebody that they love. So the effects of witnessing or being involved in severe hospitalisation can be exacerbated by having to isolate after treatment and not being able to have the support of close family and friends when you are recovering. And as well, again, seeing information about the virus a lot on the news or in social media could trigger further distress, as could things like follow-up medical appointments if a lot of their trauma is around their medical treatment. So the symptoms of medical treatment trauma can be very similar to those stemming from other traumatic events. So things like hypervigilance, so that can be like having an exaggerated startle response, being very, very aware of what's going on in your surroundings or in your body, maybe avoiding certain people, certain places, increased anxiety, maybe a lot of intrusive memories about the experience, or reliving the emotional experience, or maybe emotional numbing. So a lot of difficulties that can come up for people if they've had a traumatic event. So managers might be faced with staff who are still trying to process a very traumatic event, who may really struggle to return to normal activities. And they may be unwilling to return to work if they've got significant anxiety, especially about leaving the house, because often experiences like this can result in us thinking that the world is very dangerous. This really horrible thing has happened to me, and maybe that's changed my belief that how safe it is for me to leave the house and go about my daily routine. Or staff might be unable to concentrate or engage in work again. They might require additional support just to aid the recovery. So managers should be aware of the support that is available and the adjustments that staff might need, particularly if they're continuing to be treated. That might prolong the sort of mental health difficulties that they'll have. So that was a very kind of quick rundown of some of the psychological impacts that staff might be experiencing returning to work. So it's really important then to keep in mind how the lockdown has impacted staff and how they might be feeling about returning to work and how they might be processing certain experiences differently than they maybe would prior to the lockdown. So the last thing that I do want to look at quickly before moving on to some scenarios is just how we open up a dialogue with staff so that they do maybe feel comfortable enough to discuss any difficulties that they're having. So this might be new information to some of you, or it might be a bit of a refresher of things that you already know. So I'll not spend too much time on this. And there is more detailed information available in the toolkit as well that is available in the handouts, and we'll make that available after the webinar as well. So providing opportunities to talk about what has changed is a really crucial starting point for managers to best know how to support staff. So although not everyone will want or need to discuss their concerns, some employees will probably want to speak about job-related worries, so maybe safety, infection control, social distancing, transport to work, and other people might want to talk about personal circumstances, whether that's caring responsibilities or any anxieties that they have. So a mental health audit or a staff survey is a really good place to start in order to get a clear picture of the mental health of your staff before they return to work, as well as how well you're currently supporting them and what further improvements you could be making. So this might sound quite complicated to set up, but you could adapt tools that you maybe already use, like surveys, review meetings, or HR data, and putting relevant questions into these existing tools. It can help to build a comprehensive picture for you without giving you too much extra work. And regular one-to-one meetings and catch-ups, also a great place to ask staff how they're getting on. And doing this regularly has been shown to help build trust and give staff a chance to raise any problems at an early stage. And line managers who know their staff and do regularly hold catch-ups or supervision meetings to monitor work and well-being are really well placed to spot any signs of stress or poor mental health, like those that we mentioned earlier, at a really early stage. So that can give us an opportunity for a really early intervention before problems become, too difficult or really unmanageable for staff and for managers as well. So you might want to ask team members how one-to-one meetings can be tailored to help them and maybe encourage staff to request meetings outside the normal schedule if they feel like they need to discuss anything important. So if you do suspect that a member of your team is experiencing poor mental health, or they've disclosed it to you, whether that's been in a survey or in a check-in meeting, it's really important that you do respond in an open, supportive and empathic way and have a good conversation with them about what their needs are. So you might find that due to the universality of the lockdown, that people might be more likely to disclose difficulties because there can be less of a stigma associated with poor mental health when that's easily attributed to a global crisis. But some ways that you can further facilitate an open discussion, I've just bullet pointed there. Do talk about them a bit more detail in the toolkit, and I'll just quickly run through those. So obviously ensuring privacy, I'm sure that'll all be kind of second nature for you. It is important to make people feel comfortable, so making sure you can have a conversation somewhere private and quiet whenever possible. If the conversation's being conducted, online or over the phone, trying to make sure that both parties have somewhere private to talk where they can avoid interruptions or distractions. And to try and encourage people to talk, because it can be difficult, still be difficult for people to disclose information relating to their mental health, but we can make it a bit easier for them just by keeping an open mind, giving them the space to talk things out, asking open, non-judgmental questions, and trying to avoid judgmental or patronising responses. And actively listening, so remembering that every individual's experience of poor mental health will be very different. So it is important to listen, empathise without making assumptions. So how you deal with each disclosure should be entirely dependent on that individual. So you might want to explore how their difficulties present for them, what the implications are for them, and what support that they need. And discussing confidentiality, so people can obviously be understandably anxious about disclosing mental health difficulties, so you might want to reassure them that any private information they disclose won't be passed on to colleagues, and making them aware of any limitations to confidentiality. So for example, you might want to create strict policies about who's made aware of disclosure if that's not already in place. So as a rule, it should involve as few people as possible. But on the other hand, you might want to discuss with the individual any information that they want shared with colleagues, and how, because sometimes that can be quite a supportive experience for people. And so I've just stuck up here just some examples of questions to ask, questions to avoid. Probably a lot of it's common sense for you, asking someone, how are you doing? Maybe I've noticed that your work's been late when it's not normally. Is everything okay? Rather than asking, your performance is really unacceptable, what's going on? Or everyone else is in the same boat and they're fine, why aren't you? So trying to avoid those more judgmental or patronising questions. So we're at the stage now, we've maybe got a bit of an understanding of what might be going on for our staff, and we've been able to open up a dialogue. So we're talking to them about some of their difficulties. So what comes next? So we're going to look at some potential scenarios that you might come across, and after I introduce each one, I'm going to ask you, what you would do in this situation. So please do type in what you think in the questions panel. We can discuss some of your suggestions, because I think that'll be a lot more interesting than just listening to me and my ideas for the next half an hour. But I just want to kind of check in and see if anyone has any questions that they would really like answered at this stage. So if it's anything about strategies or ways of supporting staff, obviously we are going to get to that. But if there's any questions about what we've already discussed, do let me know, and I will try my best to answer them. And I'll give you a couple minutes in case anyone wants to ask any questions. Very quiet so far, so either everyone's, we're just refreshing things, everyone's already got a good idea of what we're talking about, that's great. But also let me know if the questions panel is not working. So I'm just going to skip straight on to the first scenario. So this is quite long, I was getting very into writing about this particular person, Jessica. So bear with me. So Jessica's in her early 40s. She's living at home with her husband. She's got 3 young kids, and she's quite new to her job. She took a lot of time off of work from just being employed to get treated for breast cancer. So she's quite new to her job. She's been on furlough for lockdown. She's been struggling to adjust to balance looking after the kids, homeschooling them, and supporting her husband, who's been out of work due to the lockdown. So he's in hospitality. So Jessica and her husband have been worrying about finances, how they're going to afford things if her husband's unable to work for the foreseeable future, and how they'll manage looking after the kids, because they've been finding 24/7 parenting, teaching to be extremely exhausting. So Jessica feels a lot of pressure to return to work to continue making money for her family, but she's worried about the added workload. So on top of this, Jessica has been much more anxious about her health since her cancer scare and is terrified of catching the virus. So that's making her really anxious to return to work. She's hyper aware of any coughs, any sore throats, and she's really vigilant about keeping things clean. And as a result of all this extra work she's created for herself, she's struggling to get to sleep. She's lost a lot of weight, she's struggling to concentrate on anything, and tends to be jumping from task to task. And she's quite concerned about how this will impact her performance when she returns to work. So she's quite new to the company. She's afraid of talking to her manager and what's going on in case he no longer thinks she's able to do her job. So even though he does check in with her every week, she just keeps telling him she's fine and she's not been in touch with anyone else from work. So she just assumes that everyone else is coping. So just to briefly summarise that very detailed scenario, Jessica's feeling really anxious about infection. She's got some financial stress, some stress looking after the kids. She's feeling quite isolated from her colleagues. She's not really got a lot of good relationship with her boss yet, and she's struggling to talk to him about what's going on. So if anyone's got any suggestions on how they might be able to support Jessica in returning to work, please do let me know. Some of you have some really great questions. I'll definitely get to them in a minute. But if you've got any ideas for Jessica, so I think, one of the first things that seems to be coming up is talking to Jessica about health and safety. So I think that's a really good idea, especially because Jessica is really apprehensive about returning to work, particularly about how safe it will be. One of the best things you could do is absolutely communicate with her in advance, let her know the results of any risk assessments and the steps that you or the organisation is taking to make sure it's safe for her to return. So that will help ease any anxiety that she's having, and it'll by giving Jessica a bit of notice, particularly about when she's going to be starting back, what the situation, the organisation will be like. Is the office going to be laid out different? Is she going to be working with fewer people? Things like that. that'll help her mentally prepare for any changes that'll be coming up. And also giving people a lot of notice means they can bring any concerns they've got to their manager's attention, as soon as possible. And as well, keeping people informed, I think, being really open and honest about what you're doing, what's going on in your company, and whether that's good or bad news for people, I think it can help people make their own decisions, give them a bit of security when things are really uncertain. And information sharing is often seen, as a really good indicator of trust. So managers who are more open, they're also likely to be seen as more credible and trustworthy. And staff, if they know that they're being valued and supported by their employer, that their employer, prioritises their health and safety, that'll be really important for people's increased well-being. Yeah, and another thing, definitely having a discussion about what maybe adjustments can be made, or what Jessica might need for herself personally. So that can be really important. So maybe Jessica would prefer a phased return to work, or maybe she'd want to discuss a new working arrangement. Maybe she wants to work remotely for a time or work part-time, especially if she's still having to look after children until schools go back. So that might help to reduce some of her stress and expectations for herself, to work to the same standard maybe that she did before the lockdown, and help her get a bit more time to recover. Yes, oh, that's my favourite one. Yes, self-care, so important. So obviously one thing that we mentioned about Jessica, she's really struggling to look after herself. She's devoting most of her time to her family or cleaning. She's not really sleeping well, or eating and exercise habits are really suffering. And so this will really increase any stress, any anxiety that she's feeling. And returning to work, obviously that's another pressure on her time, so that could make things even worse. So encouraging Jessica to practice more self-care, as well as along with all our other colleagues, trying to help people maintain a really good work-life balance, practice good habits and self-care. So you could maybe promote this, encouraging people to do things like, take their full annual leave entitlement, even if they're working from home. People still need time away from work. You might encourage people to practice a good healthy routine for things like diet or sleep, relaxation. So you could maybe offer mindfulness courses, webinars, maybe like a cooking group. People can swap recipes. I know that I've definitely gotten sick of eating the same 15 things on repeat for the last 3 months. So you could do some things like that to promote some healthy routine. You might promote some exercise habits or hobbies, maybe encouraging staff to make use of flexible work time, if that's possible, to accommodate hobbies, exercise. Maybe people want to work out in the morning before work, during lunch, after work, things like that. So that can really improve staff morale and productivity, as well as mental health. So yes, so I think, definitely sounds like a good point in terms of social support. Also, we mentioned that Jessica's not really talking to her colleagues, so she doesn't really know what's going with everyone else, like how they're feeling about it. So although it's great that our manager's still checking in with her, her manager might also want to try and encourage staff to keep in touch with each other, whether that's over social media, maybe encouraging people to go out for virtual coffee breaks, lunch breaks, or even happy hours with colleagues. Continuing to mark things like birthdays or other milestones, maybe with video calls, messages from co-workers. You could even do something like sponsor group games, pub quizzes, things like that. Online escape rooms, I think, are really popular at the moment. So just some opportunities that employees can maybe get together for some downtime, as well as just talking about work. So this can give staff a really valuable source of social support and connection that can help to really reduce loneliness and promote well-being during social distancing. And also, if Jessica, she's still struggling to discuss her difficulties with her managers, so she might find it easier to speak to someone who's not her manager. So maybe you're encouraging contact with colleagues through things like peer support, buddy systems, or mentoring programs, and that can allow them to support each other outside of the line management structure. As well, maybe just sharing her experience with other people going through the same thing might help Jessica feel less alone, and enable her to gain some of the confidence and the skills to go back to work. Yeah, absolutely. Doing things like going for a break or going for a walk throughout the day, especially if they're struggling. Yeah, that's a really good one. If we can go out there's been so much research and seeing how the benefits of just things like fresh air, getting out in nature, just a wee bit of exercise can really help reduce stress. So that's a really good suggestion. And I'll just add in one of my own there about just offering any ongoing support. So making sure Jessica knows that if she continues to struggle, that she's not maybe afraid of any negative consequences of talking about that, that she knows her employers will value and support her mental health. So letting her know of any employee assistance programs or similar services, or maybe offering ongoing check-ins or making up a wellness action plan, things like that. So a lot of you might be familiar with wellness action plans. If you're not, we do talk about it a wee bit in the toolkit. It's basically just a way of kind of formally writing down, what's going on for someone, what you can do to help them, how you'll know if things are getting better or getting worse, what you can do as an employer, what they can do as a staff member, if things do get better, if things do get worse, how you're going to kind of monitor that and check in with things. So just see if there's any last suggestions. Yeah, being open and letting Jessica know how you've been feeling and letting her know her feelings are normal. Yeah, so absolutely. If you feel comfortable with that, sharing your experience of lockdown, because I think there's going to be a lot of things that we're all feeling. We're all going to have days where we're feeling really lonely, really miss our families, or we feel really scared about what the future is going to look like, and that's absolutely normal. So yeah, that's a really useful suggestion. So I've just noticed there's a couple other questions at the start there. So I'm just gonna quickly have a quick look at them, see if I can answer some of them. So can caregivers experience PTSD? So this is in relation to medical treatment trauma. So that is something that does come up. So I kind of mentioned it very briefly, but didn't really go into very much detail. So caregivers, anyone that's maybe witnessed, so more so while caring staff can certainly experience very traumatic things. I think you're talking about more of maybe personal caregivers, so like if you're looking after a relative or something like that, can find it very traumatic to witness someone going through a very severe hospitalization, especially if you have to witness somebody in ICU. That can be very traumatic, seeing just what it looks like, just the uncertainty of not knowing what's going to happen to that person, having to make very quick decisions, things like that can be very traumatic. So yes, they have agreed that things like PTSD or PICS can be experienced not just by the person in the hospital, but also by close family members or caregivers as well. And is coronavirus anxiety likely to be a diagnosed condition that we'll see on GP Fit Notes? That's interesting. I actually don't know the answer to that question. If I do find anything that has been written about it, there's not currently anything up about that on like the British Psychological Society. It might be different for the Royal College of Psychiatry, I'm not sure. But my personal opinion might be that people might be just getting more possible diagnosis of anxiety or health anxiety. That's my perception of what might be happening, but I don't know for sure. But if I do hear anything about that, check out the First Psychology website or the Facebook, Twitter page. We would definitely be posting things up about that. And someone's asked, a staff member has bipolar and was very angry before lockdown. And they're maybe not wanting to engage in conversation. Okay, that may be quite a specific question. So certainly maybe if someone, if you were having discussions with someone prior to lockdown about their mental health, and that was maybe going well, but they're really struggling to engage now. Yeah, I think that's interesting, because I suppose if you're not maybe able to connect with them as easily, like face to face in person, like if they're not able to come into work, for example, it might be a bit more difficult to have opportunities for conversation. But I get that the best thing I can do is to keep in touch and make sure that they know that the extra support is there. I think we'll maybe come to that a little bit more further on. So we'll see if we can answer that question a little bit better as we go on. So I'm just going to bring up another scenario just so we can get some more ideas. So this scenario is about a man called Mohammed. He works in IT for a big company supporting key workers during lockdown. He's in his late 20s, lives alone, and he's been working remotely. He's very good at his job. He's been given a lot of responsibility during this time, partly to make up for staff who have not been able to work. And he's finding the increase in workload to be really challenging. He's spending up to 12 hours a day working from home at his computer. So he's quite isolated at home. His family lives far away, so he is glad he's got work to keep him busy. But he has also stopped keeping in touch with his friends. He's not eating well, barely leaving the house. He doesn't really make much time to exercise or engage in any hobbies because he is spending so much time working. And instead, he's taken to drinking in the evening and watching TV to help him relax and wind down after work. But he's still struggling to get much sleep and still wakes up feeling very tired. So his managers noticed that the quality of his work is starting to slip, and also that Mohammed's been getting quite snappy whenever his work's criticised and he's refusing help from anyone else. So Mohammed's feeling unmotivated to return to work. He feels like he's working much more efficiently from home. He's enjoying being able to work in his pyjamas and not to take a 45-minute train to get to work, and he would like to continue to do so. So he's very socially isolated from his friends, his family, his work colleagues. He's neglecting to look after himself. He's not sleeping well, he's not eating well, he's not exercising, and he seems to be coping with his loneliness by working and drinking more than usual. And this is starting to affect his work. His performance is suffering, and he's becoming more irritable with his colleagues and his manager. So he's also reluctant to return to work because he's become quite comfortable working from home. And he doesn't really want to admit that his mental health is suffering. So how can Mohammed's manager support him to return to work successfully? So let me know what kind of thoughts or ideas you might have about that. So this maybe touches on something similar to that question I just mentioned at the end there about maybe someone that's not really ready to admit that their mental health is suffering, or isn't really the place where they want to engage very well with managers or other support services. So one thing I think that I would suggest would be, obviously there can be a stigma in the workplace around maybe discussing mental health. So it can be really important just to make sure that people know that mental health is valued and that it's not something that will be discriminated against. So you might encourage people to be open about their struggles, maybe starting like an online forum or a peer support system, things like that. And just being aware of like what your organizational values you're really promoting. So whether your organization is placing like a higher value on outcome or success rates, things like that, or whether it's clear that those things come second to employee well-being. So making sure that you're maybe encouraging self-care, leading by example. So yourself making sure that you have a good work-life balance. Maybe you share things like your hobbies. It can be really useful to have like hobby or exercise groups. So maybe everyone that loves running has an online running group. They can support each other to do things like that, or celebrating people's hobbies. Maybe you've got someone that's like an absolute wizard at knitting or football, and just celebrating those kinds of things as well as work-related successes. Similar, I think something I mentioned before, things like mindfulness classes or mindfulness groups can be really helpful. Encouraging staff to take annual leave, things like that. So maybe taking notice of some of the organisational values that you're promoting and making sure that that culture of self-care and promoting staff well-being is really, really prominent. And yeah, so trying to take workload pressure off from them. Yeah, so definitely maybe taking a look at what his workload's currently like. Is that a bit excessive, especially if he's returning to work? Is that something that can be managed? Hopefully with other staff returning to work, there'd be some more opportunity for that. And yet again, having that conversation about what adjustments can be made, what preferences are. Someone's mentioned things like, would he like a phased return? Does he want a meeting to chat about what would be helpful for him? Yeah, again, more social support, encouraging staff to do things like meet up for lunch breaks, virtual breaks, things like that. Obviously, as the lockdown restrictions start to lift, there will be more opportunities to do things like just meeting up for coffee. But obviously, that's something that's still not allowed at the moment. But yeah, you could always make a wellness action plan with Mohammed. That can be a useful way to approach things, especially if someone's maybe not very willing to talk about their mental health. It could be addressed more as promoting like a healthy work-life balance. So it might be bringing it up as more of like a practical approach or a practical solution to a problem. So just trying to make sure that he's getting his good work-life balance, that he is, he's not working 12 hours a day, that he still is engaging with friends, colleagues, hobbies, exercise, things like that. So that might be a different approach, rather than maybe calling it like a mental health plan or mental health strategy. You might want to call it just like a wellness or like a wellness strategy, something like that. Maybe not as closely related to mental health if that's a bit sensitive for some people. So yes, I suppose some ways to adapt that. Yeah, buddy systems, support systems, absolutely. So I've got another scenario that I think would be useful just to cover quickly. If anyone's got any other suggestions, do let me know. So in this organisation, Organisation A, we'll call it, one of the more elderly, well-respected managers has died from becoming infected by the virus. So the majority of staff are on furlough, key members of staff are working from home, and everyone's been informed about the death. Many people are very upset to hear his death because he's been with the company for a long time. He's very friendly with everyone, and they've all been informed that they won't be able to attend his funeral because of the lockdown restrictions. So staff members, some staff members have reported that they're very upset about this and they're struggling to carry on with their work. Other staff have reported to you that the closeness of his death has really increased their anxiety and their reluctance to return to work. And other people, have reported that their anxiety has increased because of just the uncertainty of what their job will entail with a key manager gone. One member of staff in particular who has a previous history of anxiety and depression has become extremely distressed and has been unable to do her work. So how could this manager try and support their staff if there's a loss within the organisation? So that may be something that some of you have encountered before, or this might be something that's very unusual to consider. So yeah, talk about it, but talk about it, don't avoid it. Yeah, I think that's really important. So acknowledging the loss is really important. So sometimes death can seem a bit unreal or a bit distant when we're not able to get that kind of immediacy or that closure through things like funerals, memorial events. So acknowledging the loss, maybe offering like a memorial event via Zoom would allow staff to get together, maybe say their goodbyes to their colleague, share stories, things like that, and help them start to process that grief by having it acknowledged more widely. Especially when you can't get out to meet up with people yourself, that could be a really useful thing to do. Yeah, offering support, so giving people information for crews, cruise bereavement service, getting leaflets, things like that. Yeah, having a minute of silence, just any ways to acknowledge. I think the loss can be really useful. And as well, just keeping in touch with people. You might want to just check in to see how they're doing. People probably have good days and bad days. And you might want to maybe be a bit more sympathetic or a bit more flexible to requests for additional time off, just to allow people to recover and look after themselves. Yeah, and I guess a lot of the other things we talked about, encouraging self-care, making sure people aren't isolated, that they've got some social support, and that you have show some willingness to make adjustments, flexibility. I think all that's really important, kind of similar things that we've mentioned. So someone's asked, how do you convince people to return to work when they might be worried about their safety? So I think kind of maybe, as we mentioned, being really, really clear with people about the measures that are in place, the health and safety measures, that are in place, but how you're protecting staff's health on returning to work. And, as I said, some people, especially for the first ones back, can be, extremely nervous. They might feel a bit like guinea pigs. So people might want to have a more phased return to work to allow that period of adjustment to not be so overwhelming. And, similarly, I think when we're supporting people to come up to work, we're talking about their safety. Yeah, I think just being really transparent and making sure that maybe you have a discussion with people. What is it that they're most worried about? How can you support that person, individual? Because everyone's going to have a different response, different needs. They're going to have a different situation at home. And I think, I don't think we'll be going completely back to normal. I think the way that we work might be changing. So we might be looking at the new normal where more people do work from home. So yeah, there might be a lot more flexibility expected than we've been used to. So I hope that answers your question. I think someone had sent some questions in prior to the webinar, so I'm going to make sure that I've maybe answered some of those. So one of the questions was on supporting a staff member who lives alone, doesn't have anyone else in the house to turn to for support. So hopefully I have kind of already answered that question. And any tips for supporting staff with disabilities, whether those are physical or kind of unseen disabilities. So I think I would probably just reinforce kind of that similar idea of, we might have lots of questions about, how can I support this person? How can I support this person? I think the best place to start will always be, asking that person what it is that they need, and understanding that, whether people had adjustments prior to lockdown, whether that was for physical health or mental health reasons, that they might not be the same coming back from lockdown, that people might need further adjustments for that. So I'm just aware of the time, so I want to quickly sort of summarize some of the key points that I think we've mentioned there. So the important things, I guess, that I hope you can take away from today's webinar. So surveying staff mental health, asking what support people need returning to work. So early intervention, really important. Being aware just of the different ways that lockdown and the virus can impact people's mental health, particularly around things maybe you're not so familiar with, like bereavement or trauma. Being prepared to listen to individuals' different needs. Everyone's domestic situation will be different, everyone's reaction to the virus and the lockdown will be different. And being transparent and open about how you plan on looking after staff's physical and psychological health. So staff feel like they can trust you, they'll definitely have a lot more confidence in returning to work. And approaching returning to work with that flexibility and a willingness to make adjustments. Encouraging self-care, encouraging social connections, peer support, providing ongoing support and signposting to additional services. And something that we've not actually talked about yet that I think is probably quite important is looking after yourselves. So I'm obviously quite aware through my line of work that listening to people's concerns and difficulties and supporting them through that can be very exhausting. So it's important that as managers, you're looking after your own mental health as well, making sure that you're practicing good self-care, that you're getting good social support, that you have somebody to talk to if you're ever feeling overwhelmed or just unsure about any concerns. If you've got any ideas for things of how you look after yourselves, any ideas for manager self-care, let me know in the questions panel. I'm sure you'll have lots of good ideas. I'm trying to think what some of the things that I might do to look after myself. So I can be quite, I'm quite strict with my boundaries. So when it comes to evenings and weekends, like I'm very strict about, not answering emails, not thinking about work. And you know, now my weekends can't really go anywhere, but I make sure that like I just dedicate my weekend to doing things that I enjoy, that help sort of help me reboot, kind of regenerate from the week. So whether that's, you know, painting, exercising, cooking, maybe FaceTime with my family, those are things I like to do to just sort of reboot at the weekend before another week of work. So yep, taking breaks, that's a really helpful one. Yep, exercising, socialising. Yep, especially, you know, now when we're not getting as many opportunities to socialise, still making sure you're having those chats over, you know, over coffee, maybe in your own house. But yeah, lots of really great ideas. So we've learned a little bit then about the psychological impact of the lockdown, how it might impact staff. We've maybe learned a few skills or refreshed some old ones about, you know, having supportive dialogues with staff about this, discussing ways to adapt our approaches to managing staff in order to best support them through this transition. So if you want to know any more about any of the techniques that I have mentioned, I've put some First Psychology podcasts up there. So some talking about work-life balance, self-care, stress, some additional resources. Somebody had mentioned cruise, bereavement service earlier. So there's some, I've just put a link up there for some of the booklets they've got on coping with bereavement, trauma, loss, things like that. And these will all be linked in your follow-up email on the First Psychology Assistance website, so don't worry if you've not got time to write them down. And as well the handouts, so the toolkit that goes along with this, that's available for you. There's also a stress booklet and a document on coping with death and grief during the coronavirus that goes into that in a lot more detail. So I will leave these links up for a little minute in case you do want to note them down, but they will all be available for you. So I do just want to ask again, just the same question I asked at the start, just to see if anyone's answers have changed. So just how confident are you feeling right now about being able to support staff returning to work after the lockdown? So if you've not responded yet, just go ahead, do that now, and I'll close the poll in a few moments. So I'm just going to close the poll now, and I'll just share the results with everyone. So it does look like there has been a bit of an increase in confidence, a lot more people in the very confident range or in the somewhat confident range. So that's really helpful. If there's anything that we've not talked about, or anything that you would like to know that you think I could answer, I can do my best, do get in touch. So I've put my email address at the bottom there. So, you know, I'd love to hear from you if there's anything else you might like to know. Obviously, we've just run out of time. So if there's anything else, let me know. So just thank you everyone for attending the webinar. If you've got any other questions, let me know. Once you leave, you'll get a survey on the presentation. So we would really appreciate if you could complete that, give us some feedback, let us know what we can do better. And you'll get your follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of the webinar and a link to the First Psychology Assistant website to view all the handouts and resources that we mentioned as well. If you have enjoyed this webinar, but you've missed some of our other webinars on coping during lockdown, I would definitely encourage you to check those out. They're on the First Psychology website under the News and Events tab, and you might find these useful for yourselves or to share with staff. So we looked at coping with stress, managing household conflict, supporting children and young people, and maintaining well-being after a lockdown as well. So on behalf of First Psychology Scotland and myself, thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you all have a really good rest of your day.